On a winter morning in the year 2000, in a quiet corner of Missouri where frost still clung to bare branches and the air carried the sharp bite of December cold, a woman vanished without explanation from the life she had built. Her name was Wendy Camp. She was 35 years old. She had 2 children who waited for her return. She had a husband who would, within hours, report her missing. And she had secrets that would remain buried beneath Missouri soil for nearly 2 decades before the truth finally clawed its way to the surface. The question that would haunt investigators, family members, and an entire community was not simply what happened to Wendy Camp. The question was far more disturbing. How long does it take for silence to become complicity? And what does it cost to finally speak? The town of Cedar County, Missouri, stretches across rolling farmland in the southwestern corner of the state, where the Ozark Plateau begins its gradual descent toward Arkansas. In the year 2000, it was home to fewer than 14,000 people, scattered across small communities with names like El Dorado Springs and Stockton. These were places where neighbors knew each other's business, where churches anchored social life, where the rhythm of existence followed the seasons and the harvest. The landscape was a patchwork of cornfields and cattle pastures, separated by wire fences and county roads that ran straight as rulers toward distant horizons. In winter, the trees stood skeletal against gray skies, and the wind carried the scent of wood smoke from farmhouse chimneys. Wendy Camp had grown up in this landscape. She knew its contours the way you know the face of someone you have loved your entire life. Born and raised in Cedar County, she had attended local schools, made friends among the children of farmers and shopkeepers, and built her understanding of the world within the boundaries of this rural community. By the time she reached her mid-30s, she had married a man named Jerry Camp, a mechanic who worked with his hands and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood engines and hydraulics better than he understood human emotion. They had 2 children together, a boy and a girl, and they lived in a modest home that sat back from the road, surrounded by the kind of open country where you could see weather systems approaching from miles away. On the morning of December 15, 2000, Wendy Camp followed her usual routine. She woke early, as mothers of young children do, moving through the pre-dawn darkness with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed these motions 1,000 times before. The house was quiet except for the settling sounds of old wood and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Outside, frost crystallized on the windows in delicate patterns that would melt as soon as the sun rose high enough to touch them. The temperature hovered just below freezing, and the sky had that peculiar winter quality of being simultaneously bright and colorless, as though the world had been drained of saturation. She made breakfast. She packed school lunches. She spoke to her children in the soft, measured tones that parents use when they are trying to coax cooperation from tired bodies and resistant minds. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt, practical clothing for a Friday that would, as far as she knew, unfold like every other Friday. Her husband Jerry was home that morning, moving through the same spaces with the territorial awareness that develops between people who have shared a household for years. They spoke briefly, exchanging words that witnesses would later struggle to recall with precision. Were they arguing? Was there tension? Neighbors who lived within sight of the camp residence would later say they noticed nothing unusual. No raised voices carried across the frozen yards. No sounds of conflict disturbed the morning calm. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, Wendy's children prepared to leave for school. The yellow bus stopped at the end of their long gravel driveway, and the children climbed aboard, their breath visible in the cold air as they moved from the warmth of home into the sharp chill of winter. The bus driver, a woman who had been driving that route for 6 years, would later testify that she saw Wendy standing in the doorway of the house, watching her children depart. This was normal. This was what mothers did. The bus pulled away, carrying the children toward El Dorado Springs Elementary, and Wendy Camp stepped back inside her home. Clear's throat. What happened in the hours that followed would become the subject of intense scrutiny, forensic analysis, and ultimately criminal prosecution. But in the immediate aftermath, there were only questions and the slow, creeping realization that something had gone terribly wrong. By late afternoon, when the school bus returned the children to the end of their driveway, Wendy Camp was not there to meet them. The house was quiet. The driveway was empty except for Jerry's truck. The children walked the length of the gravel drive, their small feet crunching on the frozen stones, and entered a home that felt different in ways they could not yet articulate. Their father was there. Their mother was not. Jerry Camp would later tell investigators that Wendy had left that morning. He said she had packed a bag and walked out the door, telling him she needed time away. He said she had been unhappy, restless, dissatisfied with the constraints of rural life and motherhood. He said she had simply left, the way people sometimes do when the weight of their obligations becomes too heavy to bear. When pressed for details, he provided them with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed his story or the confidence of someone telling the truth. She had taken clothing. She had taken personal items. She had walked to the road and presumably caught a ride with someone passing by. He did not know where she had gone. He did not know when she would return. The children waited. Evening came, and the winter darkness arrived early, settling over the farmland like a blanket. The house remained quiet. At some point during those first hours, Jerry Camp contacted Wendy's family. The exact timing of this call would later become significant, but in the chaos and confusion of those initial moments, such details were lost. Wendy's mother, Geneva Gillenwaiter, received the news with the kind of cold dread that mothers feel when they are told their daughters have vanished. She knew Wendy. She knew her habits, her patterns, her devotion to her children. The story Jerry Camp told did not align with the woman Geneva had raised. Wendy would not simply leave her children without explanation. She would not disappear without contact. Something was wrong. By the following morning, December 16th, family members had begun making phone calls. They contacted friends, relatives, anyone who might have heard from Wendy or seen her in the past 24 hours. No one had. The circle of inquiry widened. Wendy's sister called hospitals, thinking perhaps there had been an accident, an injury, some medical emergency that would explain the silence. Nothing. No Jane Does matched Wendy's description. No emergency rooms had admitted a woman fitting her profile. By afternoon, the family made the decision that would officially transform Wendy's absence from a private family matter into a public investigation. They contacted the Cedar County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. The deputies who responded to that initial report followed standard procedures. They took statements. They gathered photographs of Wendy Camp, images that showed a woman with dark hair and a slight build, someone who could blend easily into a crowd or disappear into the landscape. They documented the circumstances of her disappearance as Jerry Camp described them, and they began the methodical work of searching for a woman who had, according to her husband, simply walked away from her life. The swing set in the backyard hung motionless in the December wind. The toy truck lay on its side in the frozen grass, and somewhere, Wendy Camp's children tried to understand why their mother had not come home. Part 2. The Investigation. The search for Wendy Camp began with the kind of organized urgency that characterizes the first 48 hours of a missing person case. Cedar County Sheriff's deputies canvassed the area surrounding the Camp residence, walking the property line, examining the outbuildings, searching the barn and sheds for any sign of disturbance or evidence of violence. They found nothing. The house itself appeared orderly, with no indication of a struggle. Wendy's purse was gone. Some of her clothing was missing from the closet. consistent with Jerry's account that she had packed a bag before leaving. But there were also troubling absences. Her identification remained in a drawer. Her social security card was still in the house. For someone planning to start a new life, even temporarily, these were curious items to leave behind. Community response followed the patterns established in small towns when one of their own goes missing. Volunteers assembled at the Cedar County courthouse, organizing into search teams that would comb through fields, wooded areas, and abandoned structures within a 5-mile radius of the camp property. The local newspaper, the El Dorado Springs Sun, ran Wendy's photograph on the front page beneath a headline that asked the question everyone was thinking: where is Wendy Camp? The image showed a woman with a quiet smile, someone who looked directly at the camera with an expression that suggested both warmth and reserve. Readers who had never met Wendy Camp studied that photograph, memorizing her features, hoping they might spot her walking along a roadside or sitting in a distant diner. Those who knew Jerry Camp described him as cooperative but oddly detached. Deputies who interviewed him in those first days noted his composure, the absence of the frantic energy that typically characterizes someone whose spouse has vanished. He answered questions with precision, providing details about Wendy's state of mind, her complaints about their marriage, her expressed desire for independence. He suggested places she might have gone, friends she might have contacted. But when investigators followed these leads, they found nothing. The friends Jerry mentioned had not heard from Wendy. The relatives he suggested as possible destinations had received no calls, no visits, no communication of any kind. Clear's throat. Timeline discrepancies began to emerge during the second week of the investigation. Jerry had told deputies that Wendy left on the morning of December 15th, sometime after the children boarded the school bus at 8:30. He had seen her walk down the driveway toward the county road, carrying a duffel bag. This was his consistent story, repeated in multiple interviews with only minor variations. But investigators discovered something that cast this account into doubt. A neighbor who lived approximately half a mile down the road had been outside that morning, tending to livestock in a pasture that offered a clear view of the county road in both directions. This neighbor, a farmer named Robert McKinney, told deputies he had been outside from 8 o'clock until nearly 10:30 that morning. He had seen no one walking along the road. No vehicles had stopped near the camp driveway. The road had been empty except for the school bus and a milk truck that made its regular Friday run. Physical evidence proved frustratingly sparse. Investigators requested permission to search the camp property more thoroughly, and Jerry consented without hesitation. A team of deputies spent 2 days examining every structure on the land, including a small pond located approximately 200 yards behind the main house. They dragged the pond, finding nothing but mud and decades of accumulated debris. They searched the barn with its smell of hay and motor oil, documenting farm equipment, tools, and the ordinary accumulation of rural life. They examined Jerry's truck, a Ford F-150 that showed normal wear and usage. The odometer reading suggested no unusual trips had been taken. The interior contained nothing suspicious, only the detritus of daily life: fast food receipts, work gloves, empty soda bottles. But there were observations that troubled the investigators, small inconsistencies that accumulated weight over time. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about Jerry Camp's behavior, the way he seemed more concerned with establishing his alibi than with finding his wife. One investigator noted in his report, "Subject maintains eye contact, shows no signs of distress when discussing wife's disappearance." When asked if he believes she is alive, subject responds with certainty that she is out there somewhere, but makes no effort to search or appeal for her return. The case drew the attention of the Missouri State Highway Patrol, whose investigators brought additional resources and expertise to the search. They conducted aerial surveys of the surrounding countryside, looking for disturbed earth or areas of unusual vegetation growth that might indicate a burial site. They brought in cadaver dogs, German shepherds trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. The dogs were walked through the camp property and the adjacent farmland, their handlers watching for the specific alert behaviors that would indicate a find. The dogs showed interest in several locations, but never gave the definitive alert that would have justified excavation. The ground was frozen hard in late December, making the work even more difficult. Investigators marked the spots of interest, planning to return when the earth thawed in spring. Media coverage intensified as Christmas approached and Wendy Camp remained missing. Television news crews from Springfield made the drive to Cedar County, filming stand-ups in front of the camp residence while Jerry watched from behind curtained windows. Reporters interviewed Wendy's mother, Geneva Gillenwaiter, who spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who knows truth but cannot prove it. She said, "Wendy would never leave her bobbies. Never. I don't care what anyone says." She loved those children more than her own life. Something happened to her, and somebody knows what. Those who believed Jerry Camp's account pointed to Wendy's youth when she married, her limited education, her expressed frustrations with the isolation of rural life. Perhaps she had indeed walked away, they argued. Perhaps the strain of motherhood and marriage had become too much. Perhaps she was alive somewhere, living under a different name, free from the obligations that had defined her existence. But those who doubted this narrative observed the things that did not fit. They noted that Wendy had made plans for the following week, scheduling a dentist appointment for her daughter, and volunteering to help with the Christmas program at the elementary school. They pointed out that she had left behind not just her identification, but also photographs of her children, items that seemed unlikely to be abandoned by a mother who genuinely loved her offspring. As winter gave way to early spring, the investigation began to slow. Leads dried up. Tips that had seemed promising led nowhere. The Cedar County Sheriff's Office maintained Wendy Camp's case as an open investigation, but without new evidence or witnesses, there was little forward movement. Jerry Camp continued living in the family home with his children, maintaining his routine, working his job, presenting to the world the image of a man wronged by a wife who had chosen abandonment over family. The swing set in the backyard remained motionless except when the wind pushed it into lazy arcs. The toy truck stayed where it had fallen in the grass, slowly being claimed by creeping vegetation. Part 3, The Silence. 3 years passed, then 5, then 10. The calendar pages turned with relentless indifference, marking birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that accumulated into years. The investigation into Wendy Camp's disappearance never officially closed, but it receded into that peculiar category of cases that law enforcement maintains but does not actively pursue. The file remained in the Cedar County Sheriff's Office, growing thicker with supplemental reports and periodic updates, but yielding no breakthrough, no revelation, no body. Jerry Camp moved through these years with apparent normalcy. He continued working as a mechanic, his reputation as a competent tradesman undamaged by the whispers and speculation that had attended his wife's disappearance. His children grew older, navigating the complicated terrain of adolescence without their mother. They learned to explain her absence in the carefully neutral language that people use when they are protecting themselves from further pain. "She left when I was young," they would say. "I don't really remember her." The community around them slowly absorbed this narrative, or at least stopped questioning it aloud. There were occasional reminders, moments when someone would mention Wendy's name or ask whatever happened to that woman who disappeared, But these became less frequent as time passed and memories faded. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the slow corrosion of trust eating away at what you once believed to be solid ground, the experience of Wendy's family during these years defies easy summary. Geneva Gillenwater never stopped believing that her daughter had been murdered. She never stopped suspecting Cedar Camp. She marked each anniversary of Wendy's disappearance with quiet memorial services attended by family members who shared her conviction, if not her certainty. She kept Wendy's photograph on her mantle, a shrine to a daughter who existed in permanent present tense, forever 35, forever missing, forever loved. But Geneva's certainty was not shared by everyone. Cedar Camp had remarried by 2005, finding a new partner who brought her own children into the blended family. They lived in the same house where Wendy had once made breakfast and packed school lunches. They slept in the same bedroom. They walked the same floors. If the new wife found this arrangement disturbing, she did not say so publicly. She presented as a woman who had married a man with a tragic past, someone unfortunate enough to have been abandoned by his first wife. In small-town Missouri, such narratives were not uncommon. People left, marriages failed, life continued. The children exhibited behaviors that concerned teachers and counselors, but never quite rose to the level of intervention. Wendy's daughter, who had been 8 when her mother disappeared, struggled with nightmares that persisted well into her teenage years. She told a school counselor about dreams in which she heard her mother calling from somewhere dark and enclosed, unable to respond or locate the source of the voice. The counselor noted these sessions in confidential records, but took no further action. The boy, younger when Wendy vanished, seemed to have integrated his mother's absence more completely, or perhaps he had simply been too young to retain clear memories of her presence. He spoke of her rarely and when pressed, would only say that she had gone away. Cedar Camp's second marriage followed patterns that would later seem significant. His new wife, whose name was Sandra, began expressing her own frustrations with life in Cedar County within 2 years of their wedding. Friends and family members noted increasing tension between the couple. Sandra complained that Jerry was controlling, that he monitored her movements and questioned her interactions with others. She said he became angry when she spoke of wanting to visit relatives in other states or expressed interest in activities that would take her away from home. These complaints circulated through the community's social networks, passed along in the coded language that people use when they are testing whether their concerns will be validated or dismissed. In 2008, Sandra Camp left Jerry. Unlike Wendy, she did so publicly and with documentation. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting a restraining order based on allegations of controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. She moved out of the house, taking her own children with her, and relocated to Springfield where she had family connections. The divorce proceeded through the courts with the usual acrimony and dispute over property division. Jerry contested the restraining order, arguing that Sandra was vindictive and unstable, that her accusations were fabrications designed to gain advantage in the settlement. The judge granted a temporary order, but did not make it permanent, finding insufficient evidence of physical threat. Those who knew both women, who had observed both marriages, began to notice parallels that were difficult to ignore. Both Wendy and Sandra had expressed feeling trapped. Both had spoken of wanting to leave Cedar County. Both had found themselves in relationships with a man who seemed to demand absolute control over his household and the people within it. The difference was that Sandra had managed to escape, while Wendy had simply vanished. This distinction was not lost on investigators, who had never fully accepted Cedar Camp's account of his first wife's disappearance. But suspicion is not evidence, and as the years accumulated, The likelihood of solving Wendy Camp's case seemed to diminish toward impossibility. Witnesses died or moved away. Physical evidence degraded or was lost. The landscape itself changed as farms were sold and developed, as old buildings were torn down and new structures erected. The pond behind Jerry Camp's house was filled in sometime around 2012, covered with soil and seeded with grass until no trace of it remained visible from the surface. If the pond had held any secrets, they were now buried beneath layers of earth and vegetation. Part 4. The Revelation. The break in the case came from the most unexpected source imaginable. In March of 2018, nearly 18 years after Wendy Camp's disappearance, her daughter walked into the Cedar County Sheriff's office and asked to speak with an investigator about her mother. She was 26 years old now, living in a different county, working as a nursing assistant, and carrying the weight of knowledge that had taken her nearly 2 decades to transform into speech. Her name was Ashley, and she sat across from Detective Mark Henderson in an interview room that smelled of coffee and the peculiar institutional staleness of government buildings. Henderson had joined the Cedar County Sheriff's Office in 2010, years after the initial investigation into Wendy's disappearance, but he had reviewed the case file thoroughly when he learned that Ashley had requested a meeting. He watched her carefully, nodding the way her hands twisted in her lap, the effort it took for her to maintain eye contact, the physical manifestation of emotional struggle. "I need to tell you what I saw," Ashley said. Her voice was quiet but steady, the tone of someone who has made a decision and will not be turned aside from it. "I need to tell you what happened to my mom." What followed was 3 hours of recorded testimony that would ultimately lead to an arrest, a trial, and the resolution of one of Cedar County's most troubling cold cases. Ashley described the morning of December 15th, 2000, with the kind of specific detail that suggested the memory had been replayed countless times, examined from every angle, burnished by repetition, until it had achieved the quality of something both intensely vivid and dreamlike in its horror. She said she had not gone to school that day. She had been kept home, though she could not remember why. She was in her bedroom when she heard shouting from her parents' room, her mother's voice raised in anger or fear, her father's voice responding with words Ashley could not distinguish. She heard sounds of struggle, furniture moving, something heavy falling, and then silence. Clear's throat. Ashley described walking down the hallway toward her parents' bedroom, moving with the cautious curiosity of an 8-year-old child who knows something is wrong but does not yet understand the magnitude of wrongness. She said she saw her father in the hallway, his hands shaking, his expression unlike anything she had seen before. He told her to go back to her room. He told her she had dreamed what she thought she heard. He told her mother had already left for the day. But Ashley had not obeyed immediately. She had seen into the bedroom through the partially open door. She had seen her mother on the floor, motionless, her body positioned in a way that looked uncomfortable and wrong. She had seen blood on the carpet near her mother's head, and she had seen her father notice her seeing. The moment their eyes met, and he understood that his daughter had witnessed something she was never supposed to see. "He told me I didn't see anything," Ashley said to Detective Henderson. "He told me over and over that what I thought I saw was a dream, that Mom had left before I woke up, that I was confused. He told me if I talked about it, they would take me away from him and my brother, that we would be separated and put in foster homes. I was 8 years old. I believed him, and over time I started to doubt what I had seen. I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, that my memory was wrong." But the memory had persisted, surfacing in dreams and flashbacks, creating a dissonance that Ashley could not fully resolve. As she grew older and gained distance from her father's control, as she began to understand the ways in which fear and manipulation could reshape reality, she started to trust her own recollections. She started to believe that what she had seen was not a dream, but a memory of her mother's final moments. Detective Henderson listened to this testimony with the controlled expression of someone who has learned not to show his reaction to even the most disturbing revelations. When Ashley finished speaking, he asked her if she would be willing to repeat this statement on the record, knowing that it would likely lead to her father's arrest and prosecution. She said yes, without hesitation. She said she had carried this silence for 18 years and could not carry it any longer. The investigation moved quickly once Ashley's testimony provided the probable cause that had been missing for nearly 2 decades. On April 2, 2018, detectives from the Cedar County Sheriff's Office, accompanied by investigators from the Missouri State Highway Patrol, executed a search warrant on the property where Jerry Camp still lived. They brought ground-penetrating radar equipment, cadaver dogs, and a team of forensic specialists prepared to excavate if the technology indicated the presence of human remains. The dogs alerted in the area where the pond had once been located, the spot that was now covered with carefully tended grass. The ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies in the soil density consistent with disturbance and burial. On April 5th, excavation began under gray skis that threatened rain. Investigators dug carefully, documenting the process with photographs and video, preserving the chain of evidence that would be required in court. At a depth of approximately 4 feet, they found Wendy Camp. Her remains were wrapped in a blue tarp that had degraded over the years of burial, but had nevertheless protected enough of the body for identification. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. The medical examiner's report documented trauma to the skull consistent with blunt force impact. The conclusion was unambiguous: homicide. Jerry Camp was arrested on April 6, 2018, at his place of employment. Officers reported that he showed no emotional response to the arrest, maintaining the same composed demeanor that had characterized his behavior 18 years earlier when he first reported his wife missing. He was charged with second-degree murder and abandonment of a corpse. He was denied bond and held in the Cedar County jail pending trial. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, though perhaps shockwaves is not the right word for the response of people who had suspected this truth for nearly 2 decades. It was more like the settling of a structure that had been straining against its own weight, the final collapse of a facade that everyone had known was false, but had been unable or unwilling to fully confront. Geneva Gillenwaiter, 74 years old and suffering from the accumulated health problems of age, spoke to reporters with tears streaming down her face. She said, I always knew, Wendy is finally home." The trial took place in November of 2019, delayed by the usual procedural motions and legal maneuvering. The prosecution presented Ashley's testimony as their primary evidence, supplemented by the forensic findings and the accumulated evidence of Jerry Camp's deceptive behavior in the years following his wife's disappearance. The defense argued that Ashley's memories were unreliable, that they had been shaped by years of family conflict and suggestion, that the prosecution had failed to establish the exact circumstances of Wendy's death beyond reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on both counts. Jerry Camp showed no reaction as the verdict was read. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with credit for time served since his arrest. At 62 years old, the sentence effectively ensured he would die in custody. During the sentencing hearing, the judge made a statement that seemed to speak not just to this case, but to the broader questions of silence and complicity that it raised. He said, "For 18 years, Wendy Camp lay buried while her children grew up without a mother and her family lived without answers. The defendant chose concealment over confession, choosing to let his own daughter carry the burden of his crime rather than accepting responsibility for his actions. This court cannot undo the years of suffering that this family has endured, but it can ensure that justice, however delayed, is finally served. Closing. The Wendy Camp case stands as a reminder that cold does not mean forgotten, that silence does not equal consent, and that truth has a persistence that outlasts even the most careful concealment. For nearly 2 decades, Wendy existed in a state of permanent absence, neither fully gone nor fully mourned, her fate known to one person who chose concealment over confession, and to one child who carried the weight of terrible knowledge until she found the strength to speak. Wendy Camp is no longer missing. She is no longer caught in the liminal space between presence and absence. She rests now in Maple Lawn Cemetery in El Dorado Springs, beneath a headstone that bears her name, her dates, and the simple inscription, "Beloved Mother, forever remembered." If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.